Hi there. So, welcome to another English language A-level video with me, Paul Heselton. In today's video, we're just going to have a look at one of our word classes, and we're going to focus in on pronouns. Now, pronoun is one of the 8 word classes of English, and pro in Latin means in place of. So pronouns are in place of nouns. And here we have a whole load of different types of pronouns. So what I want you first of all to do is to pause the video and to put these pronouns into categories. Can you name any of these types of pronouns? What groups and subgroups would they go into? So pause the video now and do your categorization. Okay, right. So I'm going to talk you through, first of all, personal pronouns. And what I hope to show you is that often they're very central to the meanings and the contexts of language. So here we go, personal pronouns. So we have first, second, and third person pronouns. And we have singular pronouns, and we have plural pronouns. And just to make it even more complicated, we have differences often in English between the subject form of the pronoun and the object form of the pronoun. We have a thing called the possessive. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at these first-person pronouns. So first-person pronouns are pronouns like I, me, my, we, us, our. These are all first-person pronouns. So the way that we would talk about I, this is how you would label it in the exam, is a first-person singular subject pronoun. So we go that first, then that, then that. So I is a first-person singular subject pronoun, in contrast to me, which is a first-person singular object pronoun. Now, what do we mean by this difference between subject and object? Well, this is about the position of the words in the sentence and what those pronouns are doing. So if I take I love you as a simple sentence, then the I there is the subject. It's the agent. Now, when I say subject, I don't mean the topic of the sentence. I mean the agent. I mean the thing or the person that's doing the verb. In this case, doing the loving. So I love you goes subject, verb, and then the you bit there is the object. It's the thing being done to by the verb. So the point is that in English, we differentiate between the subject form and the object form. Okay, and it would be non-standard if I said, me love her. That's the kind of thing that 2-year-olds say, and we'll have a look at that in close detail when we do CLD, Children's Language Development, next year. So I is the first person singular subject form, whereas me is the first person singular object form. So if you take a sentence like, my friend and me went to the Lake District, it's the sort of thing that people might say, and we're not calling it wrong, we're just calling it non-standard. And it's non-standard because my friend and me, that's the subject of the sentence. And therefore, in standard English, it would be my friend and I are going to the Lake District. Okay, so look out for it in terms of regional dialect forms. We have my, which is a first-person singular possessive pronoun. And then over here, we have the plural bunch. So we is a first-person plural subject pronoun, whereas us is a first-person plural object pronoun. So we saw them, they saw us. And then the possessive, first-person plural possessive, is our. So when you're looking at texts that have a lot of first-person plural pronouns, maybe the adjective to use here is collective or inclusive. And quite often, people who are wanting to persuade you or advertisers will use first-person plurals to give the impression that you think in exactly the same way as they think. Okay, so it's often used, and I'm going to throw in this word again that we used in previous videos, synthetic personalization. So this is where an organization uses language in a kind of informal way, interpersonal way, to give the illusion that they've already created a relationship with you. Okay, so we, us, and our are first person plural pronouns. They're often used to address the reader in a collective or inclusive way, and quite often it's used as a persuasive tool. We now move on to second person pronouns. Now, in English, these are easy because we don't differentiate between the singular and the plural form of the second person pronouns. So we're different, say, to French, where on the singular form you're saying tu, and in the plural form you're going vous, which is tricky because you're not only there differentiating in French between talking to one person and talking to a group of people, you're also talking about your relationship with that person. Because if you've got a close relationship with a person in French, you're going to be using tu. But if you've got a more distant formalized relationship, you're going to be using vous. So every time that you're addressing somebody, you are signaling messages about your relationship with the person by your choice. Now, we don't have any of that malarkey with English. It's wonderfully egalitarian and democratic because we don't differentiate between singular and plural. Notice that some regional dialects actually do that. So in some strange parts of Darlington, you will often hear people saying, "Are you going out tonight?" like that. And that's non-standard, but it's actually a more precise use of using a second person pronoun than standard English. Okay, because it's signaling that this is a plural form by using an S inflection on the end. So it's non-standard. But the interesting thing to say about it is that actually it's using language with more precision. And therefore, that's kind of challenging this assumption that if you're using regional dialect, you must be lazy. You can't be bothered to be using the standard form. So we don't differentiate in standard English between the singular and the plural form, and we don't differentiate between the subject and the object form either, which makes things a lot easier. So when you're looking at texts that have lots of second person pronouns, it's this notion of direct address, that the text receiver is being talked to or written to in a very direct way. And again, that might link in with this concept of synthetic personalization. We have over here third person pronouns, which in English are gender specific. So we think it's important to specify the gender of the person that we're referring to. Now, some languages don't do that. If you think of Turkish, for example, they just have a single word, o, which is non-gendered. And some languages, like, for example, Swedish, have recently taken it upon themselves to get rid of gendered third-person pronouns and simply have a non-gendered form, which they use as hen, H-E-N. So there's all sorts of interesting debates and discussions in English about the use of the third-person pronoun. And these are all the singular ones. So he is the third-person singular subject pronoun, whereas she is the third-person singular subject pronoun female. So we differentiate between those. But what happens when we either don't know the gender of the person that we're referring to, or we don't want to draw attention to the gender of the person? Then often, in that case, we use the plural form. So, for example, this book here, somebody's left it on the table. They've probably forgotten it. Now, it wasn't a whole bunch of people that forgot it. It was a single person that forgot it. But notice how I'm using the plural form there when I'm actually referring to a single concept of a person. Okay, so that's interesting because you've got the grammatical form here is let's say the third person plural subject form they, but actually in that context where I'm saying they've probably forgotten it, I'm actually semantically and pragmatically using it in a singular way. Okay, so there's interesting kind of discussions to be had about the use of personal pronouns. That's not the end of the story on pronouns, however, unfortunately for you, because there are a whole bunch of other pronouns that we need to talk through as well. So let's do that. We have these 4 types. We have interrogative pronouns. Get the spelling right on it. We've got 2 R's, so it's a double consonant in the middle of that word. And your interrogative pronouns are your words like which, what, who, when, whose. How on earth could we ask questions if we didn't have interrogative pronouns? So there's your examples. What time is it? When are you coming home? We then have demonstrative pronouns. Now, these are words like this, that, these. Though these are deictical, i.e. they are context dependent. You need to be in that room talking to that person in order to know where they are pointing to. So they are deictical words. So demonstrative pronouns demonstrate where things are. And there are some sort of more, the posher words that you could use to demonstrate this. So a proximal demonstrative is something that's close to the speaker, like this or these. And a distal demonstrative is something that's pointing to something further away, like that or those. So they are very much features of speech. And, you'd be surprised to see it in a standard text, a standard written text. We then move on to relative pronouns, which are slightly confusing because they look like interrogative pronouns. They're in disguise. So these are words like which, when, who, what, but they're not asking questions. What they're doing is they're introducing what's called relative clauses. Now, don't be too worried about this because we haven't actually done grammar yet. But if you look at this sentence here, that's what's called a complex sentence because you've got a main clause here, the IC bit, and then you've got a relative clause that follows it, what you mean. So the relative pronoun introduces a relative subordinate clause. So generally, if you've got a text with lots of relative pronouns, it's going to be written with complex sentences, and therefore the level of formality is going to be a little bit higher. And later on in the course, you'll be coming across a theorist called Martin Jauss, who came up with a kind of a categorization system of levels of formality. Okay, so those are relative pronouns. And then finally, we have reflexive pronouns, which I myself never use. So these are words like myself, ourself, and yourself. Okay, so to go back, that first table, those were personal pronouns, and then you need to remember these other types of pronouns. Okay, there's an exercise for you to do in the booklet. So you've got 7 sentences or utterances, and what you're going to do is you're going to comment on the underlined words. So I'll stop the video there, and you do that exercise. Right, I'm assuming you've done the exercise, so let's talk through them together. So me and her used to have ballet lessons together. Right, me and her used to have ballet lessons together. Now, what you've got here is a non-standard use of pronouns, because in standard English, it would be she and I used to have ballet lessons together. Okay, now the reason why it's called non-standard is because this is the subject of the sentence, but the speaker here has used a first-person singular object form of the pronouns. So me there is usually a first-person singular object pronoun, and her is usually a third-person singular object pronoun. So that makes it non-standard. Notice that we don't say wrong. It's this because it's the sort of thing that people naturally say a lot, or if they're using like blended mode text, like they're texting each other, it's the sort of things that people write down. But it would be considered non-standard. And therefore, if you are writing, let's say, your UCAS statement, where you're writing off to universities in order to persuade them what an academic person that you are, then it would look slightly odd if you used that form. Okay, so that's interesting in terms of people's kind of reaction to standard and non-standard English. The second one, so this is a second person pronoun, and this is a second person plural form that's being used. And the point again to make about that is that it's non-standard and that it's probably kind of like a regional dialect form. And what we said before was that actually it's a more precise use of language than the standard form. I'll speak to thee into morning, said somebody from Wensleydale. So again, this is the notion of regional dialect. And the thee there is actually an old-fashioned second-person object form of the pronoun. So this demonstrates that in some regional dialects, we have some different forms of pronouns. That's because in older forms of English, like early modern English, then they didn't just use you for singular and plural, but they differentiated between the subject and the object by going thou for the subject form and thee for the object form and thy for the plural, for the possessive. And if you were looking at the plural form of the pronoun, you would go ye for the subject form and you for the object form and your for the possessive. Okay, so thank goodness English has simplified over time and we don't have to worry too much in standard English about these different forms. Number 4, we are not amused. So which famous person is said to have uttered that? Answer, Queen Victoria. So Queen Victoria in the late 19th century is using the first person plural pronoun. And what's interesting there is that actually she's talking for herself. She's saying, I didn't find that funny, but she uses the first person plural form to show that she is talking on behalf of an institution, in this case, on behalf of the monarchy, the crown. So it's that collective use of the first person plural that's interesting in that context. To whom do I have the pleasure of speaking? Probably strikes you as quite a formalised register of language. And you'd be absolutely right. So what we've got here is an interrogative pronoun, but it's now kind of an archaic or faintly old-fashioned form that only survives in some particular contexts. And so what it is, it's an object interrogative pronoun. Okay, most people today would say, who am I speaking with? Who have I got the pleasure of speaking with? So this is a slightly old-fashioned, archaic form that maybe people like Prince Charles are continuing to use, but maybe in 50 years' time, nobody on this planet may be using that form. So it's an indication of how language changes, and even little words like pronouns are subject to this language change as well. And then we've got number 6 and number 7. We've got old Serena Williams. Serena Williams won the Spanish Open again this year. It's the 6th time she has won the crown. So she there is your third person subject pronoun. The point about it is the she there is a reference back, which is like the main job of pronouns. They save us time by referring back to somebody that we know who it is. So this is called an anaphoric reference. So an anaphoric reference is the use of a pronoun to refer back to something. And it saves us time. How tiresome it would be if that every time we were mentioning this person, we had to say their full name. Okay, so it's an anaphoric reference. And that is in contrast with number 7, where it says, she's done it again. Yes, Serena Williams has won the Spanish Open for the 6th time. And so the she there, we don't know who she is. So, as listeners to this, we're thinking, who is this person? Is it my mother? Is it my sister? No, it's Serena Williams. So this is what's called a cataphoric reference. So a cataphoric reference is using a pronoun to refer to something which is going to be explained later on. That's a cataphoric reference. So it's a reference forward. So that's often used by journalists in order to pique your interest. Who is this person that we're talking to? It creates mystery. Okay, so I hope I've convinced you that pronouns are worth dwelling on a little bit. I'm not suggesting that you're going to write an entire essay about pronouns, but if you can put the AO1 label on pronouns and show how it connects in with the meaning and the context, then your examiner is going to love you. Talking about people loving, here's David Cameron. Yes, here's David Cameron prior to the Brexit vote in 2016. So he's appealing to the public. on Brexit. So on the slideshow, you want to be watching this very carefully. And as you watch it, make a note of what pronouns is David Cameron using and how does it impact on the meanings and the context. Okay, so I will let you do that in your own time because it's on the slideshow. And in the booklet, we've got, I've transcribed the whole thing. So what you want to do is you want to annotate very closely. You want to identify all of the different pronouns that are being used and then try and link it in with the contexts. So let's do the first bit together. I want to speak very directly to those of my generation and older. Now notice that he's foregrounded at the beginning of the sentence a first person singular pronoun. So he's trying to make a very personalised message because after all, he was the Prime Minister at the time and he doesn't want to sound too distant and authoritarian. So he's trying to communicate in a kind of personalised way. So that's why he uses a very direct first person singular pronoun at the beginning, and he uses the first person singular possessive pronoun, my generation, to talk about, in a collective kind of way. He then goes on to talk about Europe. I know Europe isn't perfect. Believe me, I see and I understand those frustrations. I feel them myself. Now, in only a few words, we've got a huge number of first-person singular pronouns here. We have I, which I can see is 4 of those, 4 I's in 3 sentences. And we've got myself, which remember is a reflexive pronoun. So again, what he's trying to do at the beginning of the speech is to make it very, very heavily personalised so that when we're listening to it, we're not just thinking, oh, that's just some stuck-up remote politician. But there is somebody who is talking from the heart. They're talking very genuinely about their own thoughts and feelings. And that's why I have the repetition of those pronouns. Okay, so your job is to kind of deconstruct the use of the pronouns in the rest of the speech. And don't just say the things that I've said already about personalisation, because there are other things to point out about the way that he uses pronouns. Okay, I'm going to call it a day there. That's the end of our little session about pronouns. Hopefully, I've convinced you that this word class, pronouns, is worthy of your attention. Thank you.